November 11th is Veterans Day, and normally I'd be preaching about veterans on the Sunday immediately before, but I'm going to be away that Sunday, so I'm preaching on veterans now. And I also want to tell you about this stole that I'm wearing. This formerly belonged to Captain Chris Antal, who was an Army chaplain in Afghanistan. He was my chaplain in Afghanistan, and he resigned his commission because he could not, in good conscience, serve the way the drone war was working out. And when I was ordained, he gave the sermon at my ordination, and afterwards he presented me with this stole, and he's now a chaplain at the VA in Philadelphia. So I wear it in his honor. This is a sermon about stories, and I'll start with one about me. So a week or so after I came home from my year in Afghanistan, I was in New York City, and I tell you, New York City is a great place to visit after a year in a war zone. For me, it was mostly the food. There's this deli in the Lower East Side called Russ and Daughters, where you can get liver spread and sliced dill pickles on an egg bagel. They are not serving that in the Chow Hall in Kandahar. So New York City is a great place to come home to until it isn't. And my isn't moment happened when we went into some store in Midtown, and the store was more like a nightclub. It had loud music and flashing lights and mirrors, and my PTSD was triggered. And I panicked, and I rushed out of the store, and fortunately we were close to Central Park, and I just kind of half ran into the park and found a bench in a quiet spot. It took me a while to settle down. Coming home is a mixed bag. When we're deployed overseas, everything is about coming home. It's when we take off our uniforms, when we return to our civilian status, and hopefully the home that we left behind. Coming home is when we become veterans. And it can be joyous. Coming home means beds and beer and eating off of plates that don't have section dividers. And it means love and family and the pride of survival and accomplishment. Unfortunately, we also know all too well that coming home is hard for some veterans. Some don't do it by choice. Injuries or force reductions cut their careers short. Others return to broken families. Still others wrestle with the physical and mental wounds that last long after their part in the conflict is over. And the families and friends who want to welcome their beloved veterans home may be confused. They may not know what to say or how to say it. So with your permission, I'd like to do a roll call. If you wish, please raise your hand if you fall into one of these categories. So first, raise your hand if you're currently on active duty in the military. Okay. Raise your hand if you're currently in the reserves or National Guard. Raise your hand if you served in the military at one time. Raise your hand if you have a parent, a sibling, or a child who's currently on active duty in the military. Raise your hand if you have a parent, a sibling, or a child who has ever served in the military. Pretty much the whole room. I could go on, but if this experience serves me, my experience, most people sitting in this Unitarian Universalist sanctuary are connected somehow to the military. And to be thorough, all of us taxpayers pay for the bullets and the uniforms and the jet fuel and the hospital rooms. We're all in it. As for me, I was a cavalry scout in the Army National Guard in a unit in Albany, New York, and then I was an active duty artillery officer in the United States Marine Corps. For the record, all that service took place during peacetime. More recently, however, I spent a year from 2012 to 2013 in Afghanistan as a Department of Defense contractor. I was repairing the X-ray scanners they use at the gates of all the little bases that they use to check people and vehicles for IEDs. And since I've come home, I've worked as a chaplain at the VA myself and done work with the veterans group Soldier's Heart. I think it's fair to say this is all personal. This is personal for all of us. Because of my experiences, I've come to believe that one of the things that keeps veterans from truly coming home, and that keeps families and friends from truly welcoming those veterans home, is the stories that we all tell ourselves about veterans. And by we, I mean both civilians and veterans. These stories keep us in isolation, and they keep us from having the real conversations that can lead to a genuine homecoming. So the first story that some veterans tell themselves is that no one else can understand what I went through. No one else can understand what I went through. What soldiers experience, and I'm going to just use the word soldier as a shorthand term for anybody who served in the military, so my apologies to the Navy and the Air Force, the Marine Corps, the National and the Coast Guard. So what soldiers experience can be extreme, and the circumstances can be unique. But the kinds of feelings that they end up with are more common than what soldiers sometimes tell themselves. So let's look at the two major conditions that veterans can experience: post-traumatic stress disorder and moral injury. And the Veterans Affairs Administration call these two conditions, along with traumatic brain injury, the signature wounds of the Iraq and Afghanistan wars. So PTSD is a condition that develops after a person has an intense experience of bodily harm or fear of bodily harm. As I just talked about, I brought home some PTSD from my time in Afghanistan. I can't point to a specific incident that caused it. I think it was just the steady and random rocket attacks that were constantly being made on my base in Kandahar. The base was equipped with this kind of radar that could sense when there was incoming fire. And when that happened, these massive sirens, like fire horns, would sound, and we'd have 10 or 15 seconds to get to a bunker, and there were bunkers scattered all over the base. So most times, because it was a huge airfield, I never heard the rocket hit the ground, but the constant possibility of attack took its toll. And when I first got back to the States, sirens in particular, loud noises in general, made me both fearful and rageful. It was a little taste of what people with severe PTSD go through. But PTSD is common for civilians too, people who are victims of domestic violence or victims of crime or industrial accidents. They all have something to share with people who get their PTSD from their time in war. Many people can actually understand what veterans went through, or at least how it feels. And I think this is true with moral injury too. Moral injury is a condition that occurs as the result of doing or failing to prevent an act that a person knows in their core is wrong. The experience of moral injury results in a profound shame that shakes the victims right to their souls. So inadvertently killing a civilian is a good example of an act that causes this moral injury. But a policeman who shoots an unarmed person, or a subway train operator who runs over a person who jumps on the tracks, they're just as prone to moral injury. And I've heard from teachers who tell me that they feel trapped in education systems that they believe aren't acting in the best interests of their students. And the feeling they describe to me is moral injury. So understanding that these are human reactions rather than something that only happens in the military can help veterans feel less isolated and help them find support in their communities. The second story is that all veterans are heroes. And let me preface this by saying I'm not trying to diminish military service at all. Of course not. I did it. But everyone's experience is different. And some folks have experiences that they deeply regret. So when I was a chaplain at the VA, I was amazed and humbled by the number of Vietnam-era vets who are still tormented by what they had seen and done 40 years ago, 50 years ago now. Also, there are veterans who are part of the 3,000 active duty military who are assaulted every year. And for these folks, being told that they're a hero does not help. You know, this thing people say, thank you for your service, it's really loaded. You know, I personally never really know how to react. I think it depends on who's saying it and in what context. You know, sometimes I hear it from folks who are just trying to justify their bigoted opinions to me by saying that they too are patriots. And other times I know it's heartfelt. It's confusing to me. I'd just soon not hear it, actually. There's a wonderful book written by Kevin Powers called The Yellow Birds. And Mr. Powers is an Army veteran who served in Iraq. And in The Yellow Birds, there's a scene where the main character, who's also a veteran of Iraq, sees a group of his old friends from high school playing in the river while he's sitting on the opposite bank. And although he's very much alone and very much lonely, he doesn't approach them. And he notes to himself, and now I'm going to quote, "I had become a kind of cripple. They were my friends, right? Why didn't I just wade out to them? What would I say? Hey, how are you? They'd say. And I'd answer, I feel like I'm being eaten from the inside out, and I can't tell anyone what's going on, because everyone is so grateful to me all the time, and I feel like I'm ungrateful or something. Or like I'll give away that I don't deserve anyone's gratitude, and really they should all hate me for what I've done. But everyone loves me for it, and it's driving me crazy, right?" It's the end of the quote. This little segment shows how well the complexity of feelings that a veteran can bring home. Heroism may or may not be one of those feelings. And the Veterans Are Heroes story is funny because another story that we sometimes tell ourselves is that all veterans are victims. So this is the idea that anybody who serves in the military does so because they're trapped in a web of economic and social brainwashing, that veterans couldn't help it and they didn't know what they were doing. It's a favorite of some liberals, but it's wrong. And moreover, it's totally unhelpful. It demeans veterans by implying that they have no agency, that they made no choices on their own. Believe me, most folks who join the military are excited about the opportunity. When I got in, I got prestige, I got money, training, I got to travel, I got to play with cool gear. So the idea that there's a poverty draft that forces poor people into the most dangerous jobs, it's just simply not supported by the data. And this relates back to moral injury. It doesn't help someone to be told that they were just doing their job. The veteran knows better. They always had choices, even if they were very hard ones. And I think that any time we try to extract personal responsibility completely out of any story, we take away some of the complexity and ultimately the humanity of the situation. So those are just some of the stories about veterans. It doesn't have to end there. So our Unitarian Universalist movement does not have a great record with welcoming veterans home, but that is changing. So many folks who are protesting the Vietnam War regret conflating the war with the warriors, and they're seeking to make amends during this current period of forever war that we're in. Our congregations and communities now have a good resource actually to help us out with this. So the UUA, and I actually helped with this, created a military ministry toolkit that lays out a set of structured conversations for veterans and civilians to talk about their experiences and attitudes towards the military and towards war. And we can find, this curriculum is actually offered for free on the UUA website, and it's really well done because the conversations build on each other. So they start with really safe topics like, what messages did I receive from my family about the military, to much more complicated and frankly fraught topics about the ethics of war. So through this slow build, people who might reflexively fall into conflict, they might find an area of common ground and mutual compassion. And I've done the program twice, and I'm sure I could do it again and learn things, new things about myself and others. And if that's something that's interesting to folks, let me know, and maybe we can get a group together. So in our reading, Please Call Me by My True Names, the Buddhist monk Thich Nhat Hanh explodes our habit of creating either-or dualities. We are both the mayfly on the river and the swallow swooping to eat it. We are both the Ugandan child and the arms trader. We Unitarian Universalists talk about how we're connected by the web of existence. Thich Nhat Hanh, who was a civilian survivor of the war in Vietnam, he's asking that we see past the simple versions of each other to the richness inside. And that is our work with and as veterans. In this time of endless war, we need to practice the art of homecoming for veterans. A real homecoming is one where the traveler and the welcomer meet and see each other as their true selves, whether they are broken or relieved or overjoyed or confused. Real return means seeing each other clearly and honestly. These stories that we tell ourselves, they stand in the way. They stand in the way of that seeing, and we need to move past them. Let's create the space for people, civilians and veterans alike, to tell their own stories their own way. Because it's through our own real stories that we truly come home. Amen, and blessed be.
We're going to invite you to rise in body or spirit to help us sing this song. We have to do a little adjusting here to get into position, so bear with us.